Hey, and welcome back to Soaring Profits Thursday Night Live. We are so happy to have you all back. I love the fact that our community, our profiteers out there are growing, and you're starting to ask us questions on our videos and comments. And I'm so glad you all came last week to hear the wonderful Paula, and we have some exciting news coming up in the future for that. Sorry, not Paula, Pamela. Sorry. But today we have the wonderful and great Tiphaine. We were going to interview Tiphaine and her wife Paula, but unfortunately they're in a town that has no power or internet. So quite quickly, Tiphaine, being the brilliant woman she is, got to a place where she, in fact, could join us, but unfortunately Paula can't. So we will have to join Paula back later. But so Tiphaine and Paula started a wonderful program called Spill Propagation. And it's all about helping the deaf community be active in art. And I don't want to touch on how they do that, because Tiphaine actually has some amazing stories to explain really what that is. And plus, not being part of the deaf community, I don't think it's my place to tell you about it. But Tiphaine originated from France. She has a BA in graphic novel and works in French, English, and 2 sign languages. My gosh, she knows more languages than I do. For over 10 years, Tiphaine has worked as a professional artist in comic arts, printmaking, sign language, translation, and performance. Her work has been featured in several exhibitions and documentaries. Tiphaine has hosted national arts leadership residences, expanding art practices in sign language with Spill Propagation, and in 2018 was honored for her leadership in the arts in LSQ in Quebec. She has done so many wonderful things. Not only that, she has allowed and I'm sorry if I say this wrong, you can correct me please, the deaf community to reach the arts in a way that I have never heard of, that is ingenious and creative and beautiful in a way that is so interactive and wonderful. And I just want to say, Tiphaine, I think what you're doing is amazing. I wish Paula was here to also hear that, so I hope you pass that on. But I'm all about inspiration. I'm all about motivation. Like, it took me a long time to motivate Patrick over there to do Soaring Profits. And now that we do it, we meet wonderful people like you, and he knows how lovely it is. But what motivated you to go from what you were already doing, which is all this wonderful, wonderful things, to now helping others reach higher levels? What brought you to that?
Well, I'll start by saying, yes, it's unfortunate that Paula isn't here with us this evening, but that's okay. I'm here to represent Spill Propagation, as well as the deaf artists that we work with. Thank you so much, James and Pat, for inviting me. Maybe I'll start by telling you, this is how I sign my name. This is my name sign, Tiphaine Giraud. In the deaf community, many individuals in the deaf community and many interpreters as well. Not only, we use their proper names, but then also we use their sign name. And Paula's name is signed like this. And as you can imagine, it's because of her last name, Paula Bath. And that's where her name sign came from. And that's how everybody in the deaf community refers to her. We, have been on this path for multiple years. ASL is the language in sign language that Paula uses. She used to be an interpreter, and so she has quite the experience in the ASL deaf community. And myself, I am a first language LSQ, Langue des Signes Québécoise user. And so our paths just intertwined beautifully. And to answer your question, the inspiration for Spill for Paula, I think, came when she went to Sweden and met the leader of the Tisk Theatre by the name of Josette Bouchel Mingot. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But anyways, she was in Sweden for a great deaf event and was just blown away by her experience. She saw on stage there such a difference in terms of what we see here in Canada. In Canada, if you want to see a play and you happen to see ASL, usually the interpreters are way off to one side of the stage, and you have to do the ping pong effect, you know, watching the interpreters and then coming back to the actors on stage. And so it's not the same experience, right? Watching a play that is interpreted the way that we do it here in Canada. But in Sweden, it was so different. There was co-creation. And for example, if there were 5 hearing actors on stage, you would have 5 deaf actors that would play mirror the same role together. And so the way that it was created, both languages were intertwined one with the other. And so you could really get these differences in the languages, sensory experience, fully accessible in comparison to what we have here in Canada. So to make a long story short, she came back to Canada, told me about it. And, you know, I was involved with the deaf community and deaf theater. And I thought, you know, no, we don't do it that way here in Canada. We seem to be a little bit behind. That's something that we should probably work on. And so we decided to, you know, form SPIL in 2009. Following that, we invited Josette to host a workshop, a number of workshops actually here in Canada, with multiple partnerships with deaf actors, with deaf allies as well to the community. So not only deaf actors, but hearing actors alike who were interested in this co-creation, interpreters as well. Some were involved. And so we really worked at co-creating the works together. And through time, we also have provided residencies in Canada, etc.
Wow.
And in terms of the theater, it's just that's how it all really came to be. That was the trajectory of SPIL.
Wow, that's wild, Tiphaine. And again, thank you for joining us. This is a really unique experience for us, and being able to have a discussion with you today and experience what you folks are doing, allowing a community to be more immersed and be able to experience something on a different level for both aspects, for both communities. That's such an important thing. And you're saying that you, with your arts background and the graphic design and that, is there other aspects, or is it all dramatic arts based?
In fact, it is multidisciplinary. That's the approach that we take here at SPIL. It depends on who's involved and what they want to work on. For example, it depends on the projects that we have on the go. Paula has studied, she's taking her PhD, and really looking at different senses. And so how do we develop senses? Anyways, that's what she's studying. And there's one woman by the name of Ellen Waterman, who is a musician. She's a flautist. And she asked SPIL if we were interested in collaborating. So we heard her out, and we had, you know, good communication, her, Paula, myself. And my first reaction was, seriously, with a flautist? I'm deaf. I have no musical background. How is this going to work? It's impossible. And Paula said, we'll figure it out. We're going to work it out. There is a way. And I thought, seriously, flute, music. This is way beyond my capabilities, way beyond my scope. But I thought, okay, let's talk about it. And so Ellen wrote out a musical score, and Paula and I discussed at home. And of course, this was happening during COVID, which added another layer of challenge to this potential collaboration. But we thought, okay, let's collaborate with David Bobier, who does a lot of work with vibration vests. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we thought, oh, maybe could we ask David if we could borrow these vests? And essentially what these vests do is once you connect them to sound, they will vibrate in a different way to give you a sense of what's happening. So I tried it out, but with the flute, it's just in a pitch where it was very difficult for me to even feel any kind of vibration. So we had to try to figure that out. So we asked the kids, come and help. My kids are 8 and 10 years old, and they're always eager to get into different projects, and we like to get them involved as well. So we said, come here, guys, listen to this music, through the earphones, and let me know, try to describe, if you can, try to follow the rhythm, try to follow the sound, try to describe it for me. So they did. They were listening, and they were doing their best. And I said, okay, thank you very much. That gives me another perspective. So I went away and I gave it some thought. And I thought, we could use vibrations, but it's not the same. Like the vest vibrations work really well if it's a bass sound. And so with the flute, it's quite different. You have to sort of connect with it in a different way. It's air, right? It's all about air. So Paula said, okay, let's try something else. Let's try to draw. Of course, as an artist, as a visual artist, I thought, okay, I'm going to try to draw it out. So I was using the vest plus trying to think of air. And that's how I inspired, my drawing. I thought, okay, maybe the wind is blowing through the instrument quite quickly. Oh, maybe now it's going less quickly, kind of like a car goes through a storm, right? Like that kind of parallel. So I was really just trying to feel my way and draw my way through what I thought this musical score was representing and what I was feeling. And so I did that, and I sent Ellen my drawing, and she was shocked. She said, that's exactly the parallel I was looking for. And I said, how is that possible? We're from 2 different worlds. But there was a parallel, and I was shocked. So I said, okay, with this, different technique of drawing, I decided to take a Tibetan bowl. Those bowls where you just, they ring forever and ever. And sometimes you can put water in them, drop rocks into them as well. And you can see how the rocks will, move the water, etc. And you can see the vibration. And so I thought, okay, that's another technique. So she tried that. And then with the flute as well, we were thinking, well, that's a different object, right? And the musician, how does the musician interact with that object? And Ellen thought, oh, that's a great idea. Thank you for challenging me on that. Thank you for that question, she said. And so she sort of took our reflections, and we kind of went back and forth like that, working on this project, working on this score. And it was quite an interesting and enriching experience. And so to me, that's a really good example of co-creation. And it has nothing to do with accessibility, but has everything to do with the 3 of us figuring out together what each person is bringing, what skill set, what experience they're bringing, and of their true selves, and how do we meld that together to co-create really from within. So just to give you an example.
That's an incredible story, and it really does tell us quite a bit of what you're doing. Like, I think it's innovation is what you're into. It's you're reinventing something that hasn't been done before. And the fact that you're like looking at art in a different way, including your kids, I love that. Kids are so inspirational and see outside of the box because they haven't been taught to see inside the box yet. So they see things we don't. So I think that part is beautiful. And the fact that you're connecting water and movement with the flute, which is something that I would never have thought of. I think that's beautiful. It's wonderful. So when you're collaborating,
and I have to say, I have to thank Paula for that, because she was the one that thought it was a great idea, and I was not on board. But she likes that kind of thing. What is really out of the box? What's really different? So, okay. And every morning, at home, this is a typical occurrence. The kids just go out of the room because they know that the two of us are just going to be sitting there philosophizing and discussing, what our next project is going to be, or what our next challenge is going to be. And they know that they get called upon, and they're very happy to contribute. And, a lot of the times their ideas do come to fruition as well.
100%. No, I think that's fantastic. And like James was saying, is that you're kind of re-engineering something that could really have a very broad impact on the world in general, right? You were talking a little bit earlier when we were in the green room about how your artistic journey started, and I wanted to come back to it because I thought it was such a really cute and beautiful journey, but it also illustrates a bit of that initial struggle that some people maybe have to overcome. So can you tell us a little bit about your first play that you were in?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I guess it's one of those stories that sticks with you, and Paula likes this one as well. So yes, so as a child, I grew up in France. I was born in France, and in France, I started school at the age of 3. That's the system there, and my parents decided that it would be good for me to have both deaf and hearing experiences in my schooling. And so I spent some time with deaf students, and I spent some time with hearing students. However, that was quite a struggle, I will admit. Doing a half a day on one side and half a day on the other. But at the end of the year, you probably did this yourselves, James and Pat. At the end of the year, you probably were in plays at school, etc. I think that's a typical thing. All kids have to go through that. So I, lucky me, had 2, right? One play with the deaf kids and one play with the hearing kids. And so when I was with the deaf students, I got the role of the ladybug. It was quite an impressive costume, I have to say. It was a beautiful red, huge at the back, and I was contributing and chatting with the other animals. I had a very important role. And I remember, I had to ask the crocodile, like, why do you do that? Why do you eat things? I eat flowers. Anyways, I had a very important role, and I got to sign during the play. And so I was very proud of that moment. If I compare that to the play and the role that I had with the non-deaf students, I had the role of the tree. So, wow, right? I feel honored to just stand there just like this and be a tree and watch everybody else around me basically be involved in the tree, and I was just standing there wishing I could, play one of those roles. But of course, I couldn't. And so they made me a prop, it was a non-speaking role. So in comparison to the ladybug, I wish everybody, had the opportunity to be the ladybug.
Tiphaine, I think it's such an interesting story because I think it touches on so much and likely draws that inspiration from, the one experience you had that you were so proud of to the other experience you're like, this isn't accessible. This isn't something that fits. It's not who I am. I can shine. I can be more. And when given that opportunity, you're able to do so much more. And I think that's such a unique thing in what you're doing now. You and Paula doing what you're doing now. And I think it's wonderful. This whole experience has been really unique for me and very eye-opening. And interviewing someone like yourself who, where you are geographically, I wouldn't run into you every day. And what you do as with Spill, I wouldn't run into you every day. So this is a really unique experience for us. Growing up in France and then coming to Canada, you're saying that there's a difference in, you were talking about some European countries versus Canada in regards to the accessibility and the play structure. But how was France for you? How did you find France growing up? And what are some of the differences and contrasts maybe, or likenesses with here in Canada?
That's a really good question. Thanks for that. It's true. So there's definitely a difference. If I think of Sweden, they don't really limit funding when we think of access. So, anyone who needs access anytime, anyone who needs interpreting services, you can have it. There are no rules, whether it has to be business related or just general life, personally related. It can be medical. But, here in Canada, it is limited to, business, medical, educational. And sometimes it's very difficult to find an interpreter. It depends on where you live as well. If you, depending on which province you're in, Ontario and Quebec, there are differences. In Quebec, we have our own challenges as well because the financing is a little bit different. I remember when I was in school, I was the one, the deaf student had to apply for funding to pay for the interpreters, which is quite barrier causing. It just adds so much to the experience of being a student in Quebec. In post-secondary studies. In Ontario, that's not the case. But again, like every province has their own sort of setup. And in theater, it's very different. Like I was saying before, theater is very different. In Canada, it's not always accessible. You'll have one play that might be accessible. The next one or the next few won't be. You might have one where they have gained funding. The next one doesn't. They might have a collaboration. They might be working with Spill, in which case they would be accessible. But again, like it's not. It's a lot of work to apply for funding, and then it's a lot of work to create those partnerships as well to make sure that the cycle continues. But here in Canada, it's not as easy as it is if you were living in Sweden. And maybe I'll add, you were asking about my time in France. There are interpreting services in France. I would say that their system resembles a little bit the one in Canada as well, where there are limitations of where and when you can get services. But it was in 1984, right, that I was born. And so that was a different time, if I don't know what it's like now for the kids that are born deaf in that area now, but because most of my life now and my experiences now are Canadian versus French. But, moving to Canada, was really the reason behind it was for a higher education. Most people will move to Canada because there's war in their country, right? Most people will move to Canada as refugees or for political reasons, right? My family, my parents decided that it was best to move to Canada for interpreting services, for education, to allow me to get a higher education. Had I stayed in France, I don't believe I would have, gotten a degree because the system there is much more oralistic. So teaching individuals or trying to teach individuals to use their voice, and that's not very successful. And so, coming to Canada was really, way more beneficial for me. In France, there were no extracurricular activities, and so my evenings were spent just catching up on schoolwork. There was no time for sports like other kids. There was no time for art either. But in Canada, going to university here, I thought, wow, this is what it's like to have free time. Seriously, this is right on. And so I took up so many different things. I had to catch up for some very lost time. So I definitely grew my art a lot more in Canada, needless to say.
So you briefly said that they in France they were pushing the vocal aspect of it. Does that mean that they were trying to make you talk?
Mm-hmm. Essentially, it's they strongly teach oralism. I still think that that's happening today as well. And in fact, my time spent in France, from when I was little to when I was about 5 years old, they were trying to teach me how to speak, which perhaps you can imagine, when you can't hear the language, it's quite difficult to replicate a language that you can't hear. And so I learned a little bit of French Sign Language there, but I was quite young. And then, as language acquisition is really important. And so, that was part, I still feel like, I lost a lot of that because from 0 to 5, I really wasn't exposed to my language. And so the foundational pieces of my sign language, could have definitely benefited other languages as I continued my growth. But from 8 to 14, I really was able to pick up a lot of language. As much as I could. And so that's been, my journey. Writing is still a bit of a challenge for me because if I parallel with sign language, in sign language we don't use prepositions; they're already included in our signs. And so in French, when we write sentences and use articles and words like de, la, de, those rules are quite strict in the written French language. And so those are pieces that I struggled with for a long time because, again, not being able to hear the language, it's that much more challenging to try and write it. But I am quite well versed in French, but it's definitely a hurdle that I've had to overcome. And, definitely because 0 to 5 is language foundational time. And with each individual, that's just so important. I think, if oralism works for someone, that's great. I'm not against it. But if it doesn't work, it's really important to try something else, try sign language, try something else. And so for me, I was lucky. I was able to have the two in parallel. It was a lot of work. I did a lot of speech therapy as a child. My parents were there to support me quite a bit in my practices. But in Canada, I got here and I was like, Wow, this is like ice cream. I love this. I had access to interpreting services and I didn't have to try to use my voice in situations where I wasn't comfortable. I could just use my first language, that of sign language. And so it was really a breath of fresh air, when I came to Canada. However, I should mention, my word, what a difference between LSF, Langue des signes de la France, and LSQ, Langue des signes québécoise. Oh my goodness. I moved here and I got to Quebec and I thought, what is this sign language? We don't use that here. Oh, okay. And so I had to really create some compartments there. And I had some fairly interesting / funny misunderstandings in language at the beginning, because, this sign doesn't mean this in LSF and doesn't mean this in LSQ. And sometimes people think it would be the same, but no, it's not. So it is, they're both very visual languages, but definitely there are some differences. So I did go on to learn very, very quickly the nuances of LSQ, followed by, adding American Sign Language to my belt when I was about 21 years old. Acquired some ASL as well.
I've heard that. So so I used to work in a school, and I dealt in autism, but the lady I worked with was an interpreter, and she voiced for a young man who was deaf and couldn't talk but could sign amazing. And so she and I talked all the time, and she said that if she went to Toronto, some of their words have a different slang, just like if I were to talk to someone in Toronto, they say words differently than they do in Peterborough or in Ottawa. And so she has to take that into account no matter where she goes. And then to add another French language, I could not even imagine. So it must be pretty difficult sometimes while you're traveling the world to sign to other people. How do you cope with that?
That's a good question. So when we talk about accents, you're right. Every location, every region can have signs that are specific to that area. In Ottawa, sometimes, so Ottawa deaf look at me and feel that my ASL style has a few LSQ intrusions or accents, probably because of where I am. And then Franco-Ontarian deaf have also a different accent, if you will. And I think that that's normal. Now, going back to your question, international sign language, knowing sign language is really interesting, especially for international travels. In English or with spoken languages, it can be very challenging. But for me, if I'm traveling internationally, I will choose, finger pick and choose signs from different sign languages and mix them. And so that concept is called international sign language. And that's really how international deaf conferences can happen. And so there's an agreement on frequently used words and concepts to be signed in a particular way. If you see World Olympics, for example, usually it will be done in international sign language. And so I guess in that regard, it's much easier than in English for spoken languages.
That is so cool. Just on so many levels, that's so cool. And again, when you think about it, for myself and some of the traveling that I've done, when you go to some other country and you're doing another language, you got an app for that, right? You can translate very easily. There's all kinds of tools, and then you don't think about what that accessibility would be like. That's very cool. Yeah. So Tiphaine, you did say that you were a couple years older than me, and coming into Canada, I had an uncle. I was my father's uncle
Did I
who
say that?
Pat
uh,
just likes pointing out that he's young. He
I
tells
do.
me all
It's
the
an
time.
ongoing joke with James and I.
Yeah.
So
Apparently,
um,
I'm much, much older.
that's it. So I had my father had an uncle who was hearing impaired, was deaf, and this would have been in the 60s, 50s and 60s. And he ended up going to the Belleville School for the Deaf. And that was an institution in which he left his family, packed up at a very young age, and was sent to this institution to be more or less raised and taught. And the experience now, you were saying about, being born in 84 and the transition between where you were in France to Canada and that, I, it's something in our family that's always kind of broken the hearts of all of our family members to what, that young man had to go through to learn how to communicate. And where now you have individuals like yourself who are out there that are breaking down those barriers to allow individuals to stay at home, to be able to interact in their own communities, in the arts community, and all of those things. So from like a very special place in my heart, that's a really beautiful thing that you folks are doing. And with that, are you folks working like in tandem with government projects? Are you looking at government funding models? How are you getting this beautiful thing that you're doing for people out and to people? And how can people engage with you?
So just going back to your uncle's experience, I'm sorry to hear that. The experiences can be varied. Some individuals have gone through similar experiences and they have been challenging, and others have been absolutely beautiful, being alongside other deaf individuals. So there's Belleville, there's Milton, but unfortunately, a lot of the deaf schools, have closed. And they don't have the same enrollment that they used to have. It would be nice if we could keep them open, but for financial, governmental, and political reasons, a lot of these schools have, not been able to continue. A lot of individuals in the deaf community are fighting to keep them open because they do, promise the stability of the language, of the education. And, back to my parents moving to Canada, that's one of the reasons my parents did move to Canada, is to ensure that I could get that really good education and not having to be so far away from home to get that education in sign language. In France, my trips the commutes were quite exhausting, and I would come home absolutely exhausted. And so that's why my parents decided, okay, we're going to make this change and make it happen so that we are moving closer to the education. Saving the commute, making the days that much shorter, so that we could also have, more family time in Paris. And I can just imagine, the sacrifices that they made to make that happen. It must have cost them a pretty penny to, make that change and live in Paris, et cetera, et cetera. They probably had to work longer hours, but, they did it for the benefit of their family. And so, again, everybody has a very different experience. And in my perspective, deaf schools do provide such promise and such an important role in the deaf community. Going back to the second part of your question, SPIL and funding, we've been in place since 2009. And there's the Canada Council for the Arts. At that time, there was a program through the Equity Office. And in the Equity Office at Council, we have some key allies there who advocated greatly for the recognition of of deaf artists, and at that time, deaf and disability community artists, so that they would be recognized within the realm of the arts. And so really, one of Spill's first projects was funded through the Equity Office at the Canada Council for the Arts. It was a small project at the time that was funding, but it enabled us to send applications for future projects that garnered some success. And then they encouraged us to set up a 3-year plan, which we did, again, through the Equity Office. At that time, everything was just starting. And so it was a lot of work to get it going, but we definitely had to get funds from provincial bodies, municipal bodies, and artistic funding bodies to make it work. So it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It requires a lot of partnerships, but it is what we do to keep Spill on the map.
Right.
So yes, it is definitely a lot of work. You have to think of potential projects, but then you also have to think of the interpreters that you're going to be hiring for those potential projects. Sometimes, we think, oh yes, we have the money, but we may not have the interpreters that are either available or have the skill set to do, what we would like to do. And so it actually adds a lot to our work. If you think of any small organization that is trying to, get a leg up, we not only have the work that the other organizations have, but we also have to advocate, ask for funding, get interpreters, explain why we're getting interpreters, work on those partnerships, as we also work on our groups. And so it's quite the collaboration. And it's about triple the work. So I'm hoping that I've answered your question.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a unique thing, kind of continuing from that, stemming from that. Is there anyone doing something similar to what you folks are doing, kind of the Toronto way, that, we'll call it Western Ontario? And what are some things like in partnership, like where we are here geographically, we constantly have plays. We have constant productions that are being done. We're a very arts-driven community here. And I can see where this is a perfect marriage. However, I do see where you're running into problems with the individuals that are able to perform and to manage the task at hand. Obviously there's a skill set and a level and education that goes along with that. But how do we create a fostering environment for individuals to want to jump into that and to understand that by learning this skill, they're helping a community that's way beyond themselves and others?
The collaborations that you talk about are absolutely key, and looking for varied skill sets. And so if an organization is setting something up, they need to think about their audience.
Right.
Is the audience ready for this challenge? Is the audience, remember when we were talking about co-creation? So not necessarily talking about access, but talking about the process of co-creating in that way that is very organic, very authentic and organic. And so what is each person bringing to the table, and not looking at a challenge, but rather looking at possibilities and not looking at limitations. I'm thinking of 2012 and 2014, to give you an example, with Picasso Pro. We had a collaboration, Spill and Picasso Pro, along with Andrea Donaldson. And the three of us were working together on a play. It was in the city of Gatineau. The city of Gatineau had this space. They wanted to host this play, and they asked Spill, you can have it. And they gave us carte blanche to do whatever we wanted to do with this play. So we responded with, okay, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's do this. And so we thought, we want to see deaf actors on stage. Uh, let's do it. We have carte blanche to do it. And so we contacted Picasso Pro. We also contacted Andrea Donaldson. And Andrea had never worked with deaf artists before, but she was like, this is great. I'm up for the challenge. Let's do it. And so we talked with her and we invited some artists that were potentially interested in doing the play. And so the people who were involved in the play were Peter Ansa. The second person is Ali Saidi and myself. And we all talked about our experiences as immigrants to Canada. And so Peter is from Ghana. Ali is from Iran, and I'm from France. And so we workshopped, we co-created, and Andrea was there as the artistic director. And it was so interesting what each person was bringing to the table. Peter was saying, I like to use my voice, which is great. And I like to sign. And so Peter was using his voice and using ASL, American Sign Language. Ali is from Iran, and so he knows Iranian Sign Language. And for me, I was focusing on drawing. That's how I really tend to express myself, through graphic novel, through drawing. I just love graphic novels. That's how I grew up, actually. That was reading Tintin. I don't know if you're familiar with Tintin, but I just loved those comic books as a kid. So anyways, the three of us were the three that were involved in this play. And so we wanted to share our experiences. Paula and Andrea were there to support us as well, and they would give us themes to work through. And so themes of immigration, themes of food, family, education, religion. Religion was interesting. Interesting topic. I don't know if, we had great discussions on that. And then when we presented, the play, the three of us were on stage at the same time. So I would be drawing, and the two others were on stage at the same time. Now, some people might think, so Ali was signing, Peter was using his voice, and some people might think that was overpowering. But really, the goal was that and it was called, it was called A Glimpse of Me, Une Parcelle de Moi. And so the audience, whether they were deaf or hearing, they had so much to try to grasp and understand. And everybody hopefully was walking away with a similar experience. Oh, I was trying to grab that information. Oh, I was trying to understand this piece, but this was happening all at the same time. And so the audience really enjoyed it. And that's another really good example of co-creation together. And so that was an amazing experience looking back.
I love. Sorry.
Sorry, I wanted to go back to the whole religion thing because that was interesting. The three of us are from three different countries, right? Ghana, Iran, and France, all deaf. And it seems that no matter where we're from, we feel like each religion tried to fix us. Each religion tried to fix our hearing and make us hearing in all different approaches. So, when I went to school, I went to a Catholic school. Um, it's not something that I do now, but that was my experience as a child. And, in church, after church, they would say, come with me. Don't be scared. Come with me. I was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? We're going to try to fix you. We're gonna put the holy water in your ear, and see if that changes anything. And repeatedly every year, at prayer time, oh, Tiphaine, come with me. Let's put the holy water in your ear. And then, the priest would put their hands over top of my ears and say a prayer that I couldn't hear. It was quite odd, but that was my experience. And then Peter's experience was a little bit different. He would get tapped on the forehead, just like this. And so that's how religion tried to fix him. And with Ali's experience, it was with this movement. And so in his religion, it's a little bit different, but it's the schedule of the light. I'm not sure. I don't know the specific term, but I remember that it was something that was, the fixing would happen overnight. And so we had these exchanges about, wow, 3 different deaf individuals from 3 different countries with religions trying to fix us. I thought I'd share that with you.
That's very, so Pat and I are both very Catholic, and sometimes people are misguided for good intentions. And, I could only imagine for you not understanding, why they would be doing it and not understanding what even the priest is saying. That would be very frustrating.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
But I just like to think it was from the kindness of his heart, and he was hoping beyond hope that prayer, which does sometimes help, helped.
I'm sure.
What I was interested in there is that, so you had 3 different mediums. You had your art. I'm going back a little bit. You had your art, you had voice, and you had sign, and you had that all married, but you didn't have someone like in Canada. We have one person, and I've watched it so many times. One person is interpreting for everyone in the room. So if there's 6 actors on stage, there's one person interpreting for all 6 actors. And it's kind of, I would imagine, hard to know which one's talking at which time without going back and forth, like you said. So in this case, there was no one doing everything, right? So when the one person talked, you would be drawn to them. And then the person who signed, you'd be drawn to them because of the movement. And then I assume you had a projector or something for your art. Such an interesting concept. Do you think not allowing the audience to immerse themselves without someone explaining it all was good? Like, what did you find from that experience?
That's a good question. Definitely, yeah. So yes, there was no interpreter. And so the 3 actors were on stage at the same time, presenting, their bit all at the same time. And so you might, as an audience member, you might be listening to Peter or focusing on Peter, and you might have missed what I drew. Or you might have been looking at what I drew and you missed what Ali signed. And that was okay. That was intentional.
Right.
And yes, the topics, though, that were being presented were all at the same time. So when I was drawing about food, Peter was speaking about food, and Ali was signing about food. So when the topics were changing, the 3 of us were, a little bit similar in the sense that we were following the theme, and then the themes were projected to guide and help the audience with their understanding. And so really, as an audience member, you had a lot of choices, right? You could hone in on one or the other or the other. And absolutely, like you're saying, without interpretation. And it's another way of showing the audience and showing the artistic realm that plays don't always have to be interpreted, you know, with the interpreters on the side of the stage. There are other ways to do it.
No, I think it's such a unique way of doing it to bring the interpretation into the main dialogue, the main story, and I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And again, like I said earlier, is that what you folks are doing with Spill is allowing this next generation of individuals to come through and be able to share their story, share their experience in a way that 25, 35 years ago, it just wasn't possible. And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's very cool. Well, folks, I think it's about that time of night, though.
Wait, I just have one more question. I'm sorry. This stuff is so interesting to me that I just can't stop here. I know, you know, we're getting close to that time, but so what I think is most important and that we haven't touched on is, what if I live in Ontario and I'm an actor and I'm a deaf actor and I want to experience what you're doing? How do I go about joining with Spill, interacting with Spill? Do I have to travel? Is there other ways how do we do this? So people watching, because we have people in Ontario watching, we might have people in Minnesota, we actually could have people in Brazil watching. What would we go from here if we happen to be a deaf actor or a deaf artist or a deaf flutist?
Well, thanks for your question. I would say that, you know, since the inception of Spill, you know, we definitely see a lot more opportunity. In Kingston, there is the Deaf Spirit Theatre. And so there are a few organizations that are set up, you know, in Canada. So Spill would not be the only option. It is one option. And so really, I would say to individuals, you know, to connect with one another. And depending on what your goals are, that will inform, you know, who you want to work with. Sometimes we can just Google deaf theater, co-creating, who is interested in working with, you know, deaf only cast or a deaf and hearing cast. It really would depend on the person's goals. With Spill, we really encourage the co-creation process and the collaborations. And we don't work within the sign language world only. A lot of our collaborations are deaf and non-deaf, deaf and hearing. And I would say if people have more questions or they were interested, to absolutely contact us. And also to check your local area as well. Spill isn't physically fixed in Gatineau, and so sometimes we can help to connect you. Perhaps individuals don't know, but sometimes just by looking, there are opportunities that are closer than we think. So sometimes just putting it out into the world is an opportunity to create those partnerships and to you know, start from there. You can always Google Spill Propagation as well. You can contact us through our website via email. We can always communicate either by email or we can set up a Zoom call that is interpreted. If you're somebody who doesn't use sign language, you know, we can set up a Zoom call that is interpreted. You could also call through Canada VRS. That's not a service that we had a while ago, but we do now. And so Canada VRS can connect, for example, if Pat or James, you want to give me a call, you can call me through Canada VRS. I'll give you my direct phone number, and that call will be intercepted and interpreted via an interpreter. So that was set up in Canada. I'm trying to remember the specific year. Don't quote me. 2017-ish. I might be wrong on my specific date. But that service also, enables deaf and non-deaf individuals to have phone conversations. And so, it's just important to know that, especially now with technology, we have so many different ways of connecting online, so much more and more opportunity that we had in the past, and more opportunity for deaf artists. One example would be in Edmonton. We have the Sound Off festival that happens yearly. And if you don't know about it, I would encourage you to check in and take a look. There are a lot of interpreters of deaf artists that are connected with Sound Off. And so partnerships are possible there. And fortunately, Tiphaine's screen is frozen. Oh, you're back. She says, I'm here, sorry. Speaking of technology, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But I think I was talking about the annual Sound Off deaf theater, and it happens in March and April. And so that actually runs for a week. And so if you're interested, it's another great way of connecting with artists. And again, more opportunity now than we had in the past. So I think we're just in the right direction.
So I just have one other question. What do you have? Do you do stuff for youth, like 5, 6, 7, up to teenagers, or is it mostly adults? Who do you mostly work with at Spill?
We work with individuals who are artists, who are adults mostly. However, these adults are also parents. And so we do have a strong family value, family belief here at Spill. And many artists, we recognize that many artists sometimes are struggling. And caring for kids can be a little bit challenging sometimes when you are trying to access a workshop or an opportunity if you happen to be a single mom and an artist. And so we incorporate those values in our programming as well. It's really important for the kids as well to learn sign language, and it's really important for them to be involved. My kids are hearing, but they are involved in my deaf world, and so in our world that we are all, sharing together. And so the experiences are done together as a family. And sometimes, if we're hosting a residency or a workshop, we will oftentimes, make sure that there are kids' activities nearby, so that there's a kids' camp or kid mining, providing lunch, etc., so that the parents can focus, parallel to knowing that the kids are well taken care of. Oftentimes what happens is the kids get involved in the art because they're interested in what the parents are doing. Just to give you one example, during COVID, about 2 years ago, we couldn't get together. And so we did an art, it's like a craft off, I'm going to call it. And so what we did is we physically mailed out packages and so it was a multimedia. There were kits that were sent out to participants. They could be parents, they could be artists, they could be families. So we sent out these kits to people's homes during COVID, which I think was really nice, especially during COVID. You know, you're at home, you're receiving this package with art instructions and tools. And so they had a métissage to do with a deadline and instructions to, you know, come and meet us on Zoom at this particular time and date and show us your art. And it was great. It was amazing. Everybody showed up with very different creations. We asked them to send us their creations afterwards as well, so that we could document that as well. But that was a different way to you know, connect with our artists. You know, during COVID, we also booked interpreters online, and so we had ASL interpreters as well as LSQ interpreters. We had a second one as well where they did weaving, and so that was last year. And again, we you know, got everybody together on Zoom. Thank God for the internet and these types of technologies that enable us to still co-create and get together that way.
I think it's amazing what you guys do, what you're building, and you're breaking down barriers for a generation that to come that is going to be just so much farther ahead, so much better off. And talking from a family experience, I thank you very much for what you guys do. Because again, with the family experience that we had, it wasn't a great situation. And knowing now that those resources are becoming available, like you were saying, like the phone situation, VRS, I believe is what you called it, VRS.
Yeah, you got it.
That would have been life-saving, right? Like that would have been dramatically different. My uncle, who was at the Belleville School for the Deaf, when he would come home, he would say to his mother, and it still breaks my heart to this day, he's like, when I look at the moon at night, it's the same moon that we look at, right? And that's how they would, like, that was just the era. Like that was just such a heartbreaking, heart-wrenching experience. And to live in that world where you couldn't communicate and we're working your hardest to be able to communicate and to be able to deal with that, like from just a deep family thing, I thank you for what you guys do. I think it's beautiful. So I think, you know, I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. And Tiphaine, this is where on all of our podcasts, I have a little slogan. James got a little sign off. And then we told you when we first started here that there's no gotcha questions. This is where we give you a gotcha question. And we leave you with the final word and what your inspiration is for the world, what your message is to people. So this is where I'm going to sign off. James will sign off. And then you get the last thing, whatever you think the world needs to know and something to leave them on. So as always, folks, thank you for joining us on Thursday Night Live. This was amazing. This was an experience that I am so glad that I got to be a part of. To me, this is an experience that in my world, I don't get to do this every day. So this was very cool. And I thank you, Tiphaine. I thank our helpers and assistants here tonight. This has been beautiful. So from me, folks, thank you as always. And let's make some money together, guys. James.
So I was told by Katie Bath that I had to talk to her sister, Paula, and the great Tiphaine about this wonderful organization called Spill Propagation. And she just gushed and gushed and gushed about it. I'm like, sure, no problem. And then I started doing some research about your organization and I couldn't believe it. And then I started gushing to Pat. I wouldn't shut up to Pat. I'm like, this is going to be amazing. He's like, I don't understand. I'm like, dude, it is going to be the best experience. We will be like, it'll be so different for Soaring Prophets. It'll open us up to another community. I was just so excited about learning about art. I am a big art guy. I do drama. I teach drama. I direct plays on a school level. And so any kind of art, I think, is so important to all kids. And to know that you guys are pushing forward so that people in the deaf community can also experience this wonderful art this way. Art is one of those things that if you feel you don't have a voice, and there are so many people out there that feel they don't have a voice, you will have a voice because you can express in dance, or you can express in being someone else, or you can express in, like you said, art. And it gives you a voice that maybe you're not able to have because people silence you. And I think that you allowing the deaf community to have this other expressive voice, it brings a tear to my eye, and it's beautiful. And I could not wait to talk to you people. I honest to God, I've been bugging Pat about it forever. How do we make this work? Coming up, we have some other exciting stuff. I think I can say it now. We are going to work with the really good Bob McCabe in Recovery Speaks initiative, his organization. We're going to create a show with some wonderful survivors of sexual assault, kind of explaining their story and their successes. And I can't wait to be a part of it. Both Pat and I are honored to even be asked to kind of be the platform for this wonderful creative story. And as we move forward, it not only touches our heart, it also shows us how wonderful and brave these people are. Like, it's amazing where they came from and where they're going. And so I can't wait to share that with you. As always, I always talk about motivation, and I always talk about getting out there and trying new things and living your full life. And here is Paula and Tiphaine actually doing that. They are living their full life. They're doing everything they love. They are happy. They're raising kids in this joyous, happy home where they're allowing them to express themselves. This is everything I talk about. And you know what? I have met so many wonderful people, and you're a beautiful person too. And I'm so happy to have you. And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences and your joys and everything. It is so great. Let's heal our minds, bodies, and souls together.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just to add to that, I really want to thank the two of you for this opportunity. I think you're both making a very big difference as well in the world. And I want to thank you for your allyship. I think that that's what I'll call you. You're our new deaf community allies. And you play a very important role, in taking on this discussion and it shouldn't be forgotten. Oh, I think my camera was freezing there. Sorry. But as you were saying, when people are teaching kids in school and the interviews that you're doing, everything is interconnected, and I think that you both, make a difference. So thank you again for having me, and thank you for what you do as well, and thank you for raising awareness. I think in this world, and for the people at home, I would say that it's really important to continue to share your values, continue to be who you are. And I think that we'll see a lot of benefit from that. And there's so many people I could have thanked as well through this interview, but there are too many to start naming all of them. I think you know who you are. If you're watching and you've noticed that I haven't mentioned your name, please know that I'm thinking about you. And that, for example, Katie, thank you so much for the introduction to James and Pat.